Each of them has a story. Each of them has a heartbeat in this person, and that gets lost in the discussion. Some of them are very chronic homeless. You will probably never get them off the street, but they're not all like that. Maybe they have drug addictions, maybe they're addicted to alcohol, maybe they have mental illnesses that need to be taken care of. But if you can provide them a program and structure and get them through those issues and get them jobs and help them with their credit and help them with their legal troubles, you have very good success with that. We don't even like to use stats of who's homeless because there will be arguments about who's counting and what counts and what really isn't homeless, and so you have a very hard time putting a face on this.
We don't really know how many available beds there are overall in Orange County. I think what we could talk about here a little bit is there's a role for government, there's a role for individuals, there's a role for business. What kind of society do we want to live in? What kind of community do we want to live in? And there are few places in the world that are as affluent as Orange County. And a little bit, this is a litmus test.
There are a lot more homeless people than there are beds that you guys have available. How difficult is it to get those beds, and how does that look for people who are newly homeless and who?
The city of Dana Point, they refuse to admit that they even have homeless who live there. They used to have a shelter which was run through Capitol Beach Calvary that housed anywhere from 30 to 50 people a night during the winter. They would open it at 9 p.m., close it by 6, I think, and it worked out great until the city passed an ordinance that said churches can only have 10 beds in each church in the city of Dana Point. Pretty much shut down the shelter. Now they will say they're following state laws and all kinds of other things, but from our perspective, they wanted to push that out.
If a city can escort, I'm from Irvine, if a city can escort its homeless to Santa Ana and just get rid of the problem by, shuffling it off to another city, and there's no consequence for that, what's the fix for that?
Part of it, I think, is for some of the cities. They don't want that persona of having, they're a tourist town, they're a beach community, they have very wealthy parts in Dana Point. I'm not sure they're comfortable recognizing it. So I would say, from my perspective, that's part of it. The city of Dana Point, I don't think it cost them a penny when the shelter was open because all nonprofits and churches were paying for it. So the resources and the networks are there. It's not necessarily a drain on their budget unless they're seeing crime and stuff increase, which I've done research and didn't see it in that. Specifically in the city of Dana Point.
But I don't think we're going to see elected that's going to say part of my platform is I'm going to build an emergency shelter for homeless in your community. I mean, that's pretty much a non-starter. And that's not because they don't want to do it, it's because they know what their citizens are going to say. So as part of that media, we need to make that okay with the citizens. And part of that's going to be, if we say we're going to build an emergency shelter and we leave it at that and people think we're just going to warehouse people here, that's a problem. And we need to have a system that says we need to move people from emergency shelter to permanent housing, not just put them in emergency shelter and take them off the street. We need to have a set of benchmarks that tells us how should we be performing compared to communities that look like ours, and how do we hold those standards up to the people that hold the levers that can make it work. The way to increase capacity can be not just by building more beds, but by understanding, well, wait a minute, this type of program doing this with this type of a person moves someone 3 times faster into permanent housing than this other way. Let's stop doing the other way and let's do more of this way. So those are things that we're working on. And so we're starting to get our arms around what that system is. Once we can measure it, then as a system we can start to manage it.
I think the solution needs to match the problem. I think the face of homelessness is not well understood. And if it's just numbers, while those are powerful, then you get into a data-driven discussion.
Each of them has a story. Each of them has a heartbeat in this person, and that gets lost in the discussion. Yes, some of them are substance abusers. Some of them have horrible criminal pasts. Some of them are mentally ill, but all of them are human beings.
I think it's a mistake to look to government, whether it's city, county, or federal, to be the solution to the problem. How do you get the community involved? If Orange County had a giant river down the middle and this flood was coming, flood from your point, you'd be getting the community organized, building sandbags. I mean, we've seen it all around. But homelessness, this giant problem that's overtaking our community, is silent and quiet, to Mike's point.
I was reading in the Chronicle of Philanthropy yesterday that so many nonprofits are getting ready to either fold or severely cut their budgets because of the government budget being cut back so much. But we are continuing to see an increase in the needs for services. I think it was 21% over last year, just at the rescue mission. That will continue to increase, especially when you start seeing the nonprofits disappear who can't afford it anymore because the government money's gone. And the government's cutting their own services too.
That is, what's government's role in creating this problem? The problem is homelessness, but something creates the problem.
Right.
So what is it that creates the problem from a government standpoint?
And you can't really paint it with a broad brush. You have vets who come back who have all kinds of issues. What's our moral responsibility to young women and men that risk their lives, so that we can do what we do? Because we couldn't do what we do without people. What's the government role in that? When you talk about the mentally ill or substance abuse, those are all costs that we as taxpayers pay, but it's not identified because you don't know, to Ryan's point, what does law enforcement, which is typically the first people that are called. So these are things I think we want to identify. It's far cheaper on the prevention side if you can catch someone's at risk before they become homeless than if you've got to deal with them once they become homeless.
One immediate one that comes to mind for me, for example, is that our local law enforcement, many of them chose to participate in secure communities. So what happens is if an undocumented, unauthorized immigrant jaywalks in Costa Mesa, which we saw, gets arrested by the police, they then get reported to ICE, they get deported or put in a detention center, that family becomes homeless. That's a constructive problem created by local ordinances right now.
I don't know if it is part of the discussion in terms of moving people out of homelessness is the availability of good paying jobs, because once you get somebody to a point where they have some affordable housing, they can go out to job interviews, they have everything handled. If they can't get a job that makes enough money to afford a place to live, then it's a wash.
They're low-level jobs, so your point is well made, because at the end of the day, they couldn't go out probably with just that one job if they have a family and they need a car and a house to stay in and pay for all of that on their own. So the cost of living and the cost of housing, especially in Orange County, is huge, and that's a big burden. We even have to figure out where are the triggers when we graduate these people and move them on. What's to say that they're not going to have to come back because they can't afford it?